Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of May 12, 2025. A huge number of events took place today, so let's get started. We'll begin with the South Donetsk direction, where the main combat operations are currently unfolding in and around the settlement called Bohatyr. Based on the latest updates, geolocations, and corrections, let me remind you that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish a foothold in the eastern and southeastern parts of the settlement. However, throughout the day on May 12th, a large number of reports, geolocations, and various publications across different sources emerged, indicating that by the end of May 12, 2025, the Russian armed forces had taken full control of the southern and central parts of the settlement. Some pro-Russian experts also report that the T-0518 highway has come under the control of Russian forces. This means that as of the evening of May 12, 2025, only about 30 to 35% of the settlement remains under Ukrainian control, specifically in the northwestern and northeastern parts. If we talk about these remaining positions, we can see from objective control footage that the Russian armed forces are regularly shelling them using FAB bombs, Sontsepiok flamethrower systems, and multiple rocket launchers. It is clear that a critical moment is approaching for the Ukrainian units. It appears that the coming night, between May 12th and 13th, will be decisive in the battle for this settlement. Most likely, within the next 24 hours, the Ukrainian armed forces, at least those who are still able, will withdraw from the settlement in a northwestern direction, possibly toward the village of Alexeyevka. However, it's worth noting that Ukrainian units likely won't remain in Alexeyevka for long, because according to recent data and geolocations, the Russian army is making a determined advance on the eastern outskirts of the village. Also, based on various mapping services, particularly pro-Ukrainian ones, the Russian army is currently advancing through the fields north of Alexeyevka, attempting to outflank the village and reach its western and northwestern edges. In other words, the battle for Alexeyevka and the village of Bohatyr has entered a decisive stage. Today, there were also several notable publications from pro-Ukrainian sources who claim to have close ties to units and soldiers currently defending Bohatyr. They described the situation in the area with a single sentence: "Control over the village of Bohatyr is melting before our eyes." This is the phrase published today by pro-Ukrainian sources. Next, we move to the Novopavlivka direction, where there is also a large amount of important news. According to some reliable pro-Russian experts, the Russian armed forces have managed to expand their control zone in the southern part of the village of Orakovo. Currently, combat operations are ongoing on the northwestern and western outskirts of the village. And again, it seems that the upcoming night will be critical for Ukrainian units. Over the next 24 hours, certain Ukrainian armed forces units will likely retreat westward toward the next forest belts, which in fact already mark the boundary between the Pokrovsk region and the Donetsk region. A bit further north, there is information coming from the settlement of Kotlyaryvka. Today, in its latest report, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation noted that the Center military group had fully cleared and established control over this village. Just a few hours after this announcement, objective control footage was published showing the Russian flag being raised in the westernmost part of the settlement. Based on this footage, Kotlyaryvka is now fully marked as under the control of the Russian armed forces. At this moment, the distance between the Russian army's forward positions and the border of Dnipropetrovsk region is less than 1 kilometer along the Kotlyaryvka-Novopavlivka line. We can see that the Russian army is gradually advancing, and it's only a matter of time before the first Russian units cross this border and enter the Dnipropetrovsk region. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk section of the front, where the Russian army is also rapidly advancing and expanding its foothold in the southwestern part of the settlement. Let me remind you that throughout April and May, we received reports and objective control footage confirming the presence and movement of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the southern part of Pokrovsk, as well as footage confirming the presence of Russian units in the northwestern part of the settlement of Zverov. And today, new reports and updates have appeared indicating that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have also managed to establish full control over the southwestern part of Zverov. This means we are witnessing a gradual expansion of the Russian control zone in this area of the front, aimed at establishing a strong and stable foothold in the southwestern part of Pokrovsk, potentially for further offensive operations targeting both the urban agglomeration and the settlement itself. Now we move to the eastern flank. Today, new objective control footage was released. At the moment, active fighting is taking place for a network of strongholds located west of the settlement of Novopavlivka. Let me remind you that just a few days ago, objective control footage was published showing an attempted assault originating from Novopavlivka toward the strongholds to the west. Apparently, this attack was repelled by Ukrainian forces from the 38th Marine Brigade. There were numerous strikes, some equipment was hit, and some was disabled. Based on that footage, we didn't make any map color updates. We simply confirmed that Russian frontline equipment managed to get very close to the stronghold. Whether there was further progress remained unclear. But today, new footage has been published showing Russian units attempting to outflank this network of strongholds from the northeast. Russian forces are trying to push the attack from the settlement of Novopavlivka toward a small mine located west of the Toretsk River, as well as pushing toward the same stronghold from the southwest. From the southeast, there's also footage showing the movement of Russian troops. In these visuals, we can see Ukrainian drones actively hunting Russian saboteurs in both daytime and nighttime near the Zhuravka River and the Toretsk. A large number of strikes have occurred, some of which have been geolocated. For example, here's a dam where we can see Russian soldiers calmly moving along it, until a drone strikes. One of the geolocated strike sites is here, and another appeared nearby. So we can conclude that the Russian army is now focused on this stronghold, the capture of which would allow them to semi-encircle or even fully encircle the Ukrainian network of strongholds west of Novopavlivka. Based on the objective control footage, we can assume that the Russian army is currently trying to level the front line. But already on the Ukrainian side of the Zhuravka and Toretsk rivers, that seems to be their current objective. By straightening the front line in this area, or rather the line of engagement, Russian units could move directly toward the settlement of Mirnohrad and squeeze Ukrainian positions from both the southwest and southeast flanks. Now we move toward the Klebenbek Reservoir, from where a large amount of information has also been coming in. Today, new objective control footage was published from slightly southeast of the settlement of Romanivka. In this footage, we can observe combat engagements between Russian and Ukrainian forces. We can see Ukrainian assault troops attempting to seize another Russian armed forces stronghold. However, FPV drones arrived in time to assist the Russian troops, beginning to strike the Ukrainian assault groups. This disrupted the Ukrainian attack and forced their units to retreat. These visuals came from this exact area, and based on this footage, we concluded that all positions behind this geolocation are likely under the control of Russian units. Additionally, most mapping services, both neutral and pro-Russian, have updated their maps accordingly. Here's how the map changed between May 11th and 12th. Based on this evidence, we can confidently conclude that Russian units have managed to approach Romanivka closely. It's also possible that heavy fighting is already taking place for Romanivka. Let me remind you that if this settlement is captured, Russian units will be able to physically cut the TN-20 highway. Moreover, from Romanivka, the Russian army may begin developing an offensive toward the northeast, toward the settlements of Katerinivka and Klebenbek. Meanwhile, on the western flank of the Klebenbek Reservoir in the Klebenbek direction, a large number of surveillance footage has been published, allowing us to observe the work of Russian FPV drone operators. Over the past 24 hours, the map in this area, as we can see, has not undergone any changes. The only notable development is the large number of drone strikes on Ukrainian armed forces equipment, positions, and also against Ukrainian FPV drone operator sites. Next, we move to the Toretsk section of the front. Today, or rather over the past 24 hours, footage has been published showing an unsuccessful Ukrainian assault on the city of Toretsk during the so-called May ceasefire. Let me remind you that on May 9th, if memory serves, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported in its daily briefing that the Ukrainian side had violated the ceasefire in several areas, including the settlement of Tetkino and also near Toretsk, where they attempted a new counterattack. The footage published appears to show that counterattack. We can see a huge amount of military equipment from the 100th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. This equipment managed to reach the very center of Toretsk. However, when we look at the footage, it seems that the attack may not have been successful at all. It gives the impression that the Russian side allowed the Ukrainian units to enter the very center of the town, only to then annihilate the entire Ukrainian column with mortar fire, artillery, and small arms. This information is also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mapping services and experts, including Deep State. They published a short article on this battle and expressed serious concern about the fact that such a large amount of manpower and equipment was sent in one direction without any real chance of return. It appeared to be a media stunt that shocked not only the Russian units, who did not expect such a senseless blow, but possibly also the Ukrainian forces in that sector. Moving on to the Chasiv Yar sector of the front, here the maps remain unchanged, and footage continues to emerge, showing strikes on the central part of the settlement using TOS-1A Sant Sepiok flamethrower systems. However, as we can see, the Chasiv Yar direction has stalled. Perhaps fighting will resume soon, or we may see a longer operational pause until the front line stabilizes in other sectors, possibly along the Siversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal or near the Kleban-Byk Reservoir. Next, we move toward the town of Seversk, from where reports indicate that Russian armed forces have expanded their control zone in the southeastern part of the settlement over the past 24 hours. According to some pro-Russian experts, by the end of May 12, 2025, the Russian army had managed to fully capture the complex located in the southeast, which was a major Ukrainian stronghold. If this information is confirmed, it means that by the end of May 12, 2025, Russian forces controlled more than 60% of Seversk. Only the eastern part remains under Ukrainian control, where heavy fighting continues. Once the Russian troops pass through Verkhnyo-Kamyanske, one could say the battle for Seversk has truly begun. However, it appears that the Russian army will not immediately advance north. Rather, after reaching the western outskirts of Verkhnyo-Kamyanske, movement is expected to shift south toward Novopavlivka and Ivan-Darivka. Next, we move to the Lyman sector of the front, toward the settlements of Zarechna and Kolodyazy. Here, as you can see, the map has changed. Today, Ukrainian sources have published drone surveillance footage showing FPV drone strikes on Russian positions near Kolodyazy. Based on this footage, the frontline map was updated. This is how the map looked yesterday. Today, new footage confirms further Russian advances. We can now say that fighting for Kolodyazy has begun, and it appears to be extremely intense. This is essentially the last settlement before fighting for the town of Lyman begins. Also, let me remind you that there were reports yesterday of Russian forces establishing control over more than 50% of Toretsk. This shows that the Russian army is gradually shifting its offensive from the Berova direction toward Lyman. As for the Berova front, the map remains unchanged. There is some surveillance footage showing strikes on Ukrainian positions in the area of Rydkudub. Judging by the large amount of footage coming from Rydkudub, it appears that Ukrainian forces have strengthened their defenses there, and currently fierce fighting is ongoing for this area. Rydkudub opens operational space for Russian troops not only toward Berova, but also for an almost unimpeded advance toward Lyman. Regarding the central Kupiansk direction, for the first time in quite a while, some pro-Russian experts have noted advances by Russian units near Krygliakivka, both north toward Kupiansk and south toward Berova. As for the northern sectors of the front, there are no changes here. The Ukrainian armed forces have reduced combat activity to a minimum. Over the past 24 hours, several surveillance clips have been published. These show HIMARS systems, which recently launched strikes using Western-supplied weapons on the town of Rilsk. Russian forces managed to record the moment of the strike, track the HIMARS launchers to their positions, and then strike them. According to surveillance footage, both launchers were destroyed. As for the northern regions, the Chernihiv and Sumy areas, there are no reported changes. That's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. All the best to you.